My name is Eleanor Grace Miller, and I'm 74 years old. If you'd asked me just 6 months ago, I'd have told you I was doing just fine. I still mowed my own lawn, albeit slowly, and I made a pot of chili every Sunday just like I had since 1972. My hands are stiff in the mornings and my knees argue with me on the stairs, but I was living, really living, in my house, surrounded by memories. I didn't need help. But my son Matthew, he saw something else. It started after I slipped while reaching for a can of peaches in the pantry. I didn't even fall, just wobbled a bit and bumped my elbow. But that incident planted a seed in Matthew's mind. He started hovering more, calling twice a week instead of once, pushing brochures for independent senior living communities across my kitchen table like he was offering me a vacation. I should have seen it coming. The Tuesday he showed up, the sky was the color of dishwater, flat, gray, and heavy, like the whole day was about to collapse on itself. I'd made coffee in my old percolator, still chipped at the handle from when Matthew knocked it off the counter as a teenager and set out 2 mugs. I even put on lipstick, the soft rose color George used to love, and my pink Angora sweater, the one he said made my cheeks glow. Matthew arrived wearing that navy jacket he always wears when he's about to deliver bad news. But I didn't recognize the woman beside him. Blonde, brisk, mid-40s, with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a purse the size of Texas. Sharon, she said, from Family Solutions Senior Transition Services. The name alone made my stomach twist. "Hi, Mrs. Miller," she said in that too bright tone people use when they talk to babies or dogs. "We're just here to help make things easier." My son smiled like he agreed. "Mom, we've been talking," he began, and I froze. That phrase, "we've been talking," never ends well. "We've found a place for you. It's beautiful. You'll have your own space. They even have koi fish in the courtyard." "Koi fish?" I asked, my voice catching. "It's called Whispering Pines. Very reputable. Very peaceful." I blinked. Koi fish and peace. I had a vegetable garden with heirloom tomatoes, a knitting group at the Methodist church, and a recliner that still smelled like George's cologne. I had everything I needed. Then Sharon slid the paperwork across my table like it was a closing deal. Legal forms, power of attorney documents, facility contracts, all neatly clipped and color-coded. "You signed these already," Matthew said, like he was discussing the weather. "I did. You did. Back in November. Remember? I brought over that lo mein you like, and you said it was fine to take care of the legal stuff. Just in case. Oh God, I remember now. The lo mein. The new pen he handed me. The way I signed without reading because my hands were too tired and my brain too foggy. Just in case, he said. And I, like the fool I've been far too often in this life, trusted him. "Matthew," I began, but the words fell flat in my throat. His eyes darted away. Within an hour, Sharon had called for movers. Movers. 2 young men in matching shirts, loading boxes while I stood barefoot in the kitchen, still holding the ceramic mug that read World's Best Mom. They even packed my dishes without asking if I wanted to keep my grandmother's gravy boat. The last thing I saw before they zipped up the last suitcase was George's photo on the mantel. I reached for it, but Sharon gently took my hand. "We need to stay on schedule," she said. And like that, they moved me out of the home I'd built with my own hands. The home where I brought Matthew home from the hospital. The home I kept even after George passed, even after the world turned quiet. We drove in silence. Matthew didn't look at me once. Sharon filled the air with polite nonsense, weather, road construction, bingo nights. I stared out the window, my hands trembling in my lap. I felt like a package being returned to sender. Whispering Pines was beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige people. It looked like someone had drained the color from the world. They called it assisted living, but to me, it felt like exile. The receptionist handed me a welcome packet, like it was a party favor. My room was clean. Too clean. A twin bed with stiff white sheets. A window with a view of the dumpster. A dresser that wobbled when you opened the drawer. And silence, thick, hospital-grade silence. Matthew didn't stay long. He kissed my cheek, said he'd check in next week, and left. Just like that. I sat on the bed, holding the only photo they let me bring, A picture of George and me at Coney Island in '78. We were laughing. We looked free. I cried that night, quietly, into the pillow, because something inside me had broken. Or so I thought. What Matthew didn't know, what nobody knew, is that beneath my mattress at home, wrapped in an old bathrobe, was a black folder labeled for later. In that folder were account numbers, property deeds, stock certificates, everything George left me. Everything I saved. Decades of quiet frugality. Compound interest. A tiny real estate portfolio no one bothered to ask about. I wasn't just Eleanor Grace Miller, abandoned mother and former housewife. I was a millionaire, and I had just begun to remember what power tasted like. I didn't say much that first week at Whispering Pines. I nodded when spoken to, ate my oatmeal in silence, and tried to ignore the slow tick of the clock on my wall. The place smelled like antiseptic and overboiled carrots, and the hallway chatter always seemed to fade when I walked past, like I was some ghost they hadn't realized was still breathing. But I was watching. Every shuffle of feet, every clink of plastic cups, every nurse who smiled too brightly while checking vitals. I saw it all. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, I saw her. She was sitting at the corner poker table in the common room, wearing a purple fleece jacket with rhinestones across the collar and lipstick 2 shades too bold for 10 a.m. "Don't bet you're putting on that hand, sweetie," she cackled, tossing down 3 queens and sweeping a pile of plastic chips toward her chest. "You're gonna owe me your applesauce next lunch." I couldn't help it. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Her head snapped toward me like a radar had gone off. "You're new," she said, narrowing one eye and pointing a chewed red nail at me. Freshly betrayed. "I can smell it." "I beg your pardon." She pushed back her chair with a screech and hobbled over on a cane covered in butterfly stickers. "Name's Ruth. And you, darling, have that look. That. My own kid dumped me here and told me it was for my own good look. Don't worry, we've all got it." "I'm Eleanor," I said, shaking her hand. She smirked. "Of course you are. You look like an Eleanor. Strong bones, sharp eyes. Bet you raised that boy by yourself, didn't you?" I nodded. She was right. "You'll fit in fine," she said, tapping her cane twice on the linoleum. "Come meet the crew." That's how I met Di, short for Diane. But she liked the drama, and Maxine, who used to teach law at a community college and now ran the Whispering Pines gossip circuit like a seasoned spy. The 3 of them adopted me faster than you could say ensure. Within a week, we were taking meals together, passing crossword puzzles back and forth, and whispering judgments about the staff's fashion choices, like teenagers at a sleepover. They reminded me who I used to be before life ground me down. Sharp, sarcastic, and just a little dangerous. But it was one night, over peppermint tea and sugar-free cookies, that I finally told them everything. About Matthew, about the papers, about the house I never got to say goodbye to, and yes, about the money. Ruth whistled low. "You mean to tell me that while you're in here sipping bland soup and watching game shows on a television the size of a license plate, you've got a 7-figure net worth? Closer to 8 if we're counting the property George bought in Asheville back in the '90s, I said. Maxine leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Well, sweetheart, you've been holding the cards all along." Di slapped the table. "So what's the plan?" And I smiled, because by then, I'd already started forming one. It began with my old banker. Well, his daughter now, Gina. She'd always liked me. Used to bring me coffee when I'd go in to make deposits. I had the good sense years ago to set up an account that couldn't be touched without a verbal password. And lucky for me, I never told a soul. Certainly not Matthew. I called Gina the next morning from the privacy of the activities coordinator's office, told her to expect a power of attorney revocation and a transfer of assets, plus a hefty donation for the community garden she was always rambling about. I also asked for a real estate agent. Ruth looked at me like I was buying a spaceship. "You're moving out?" she asked, stunned. I leaned in. "No, I'm going to buy Whispering Pines." Di choked on her tea. "You're what?" "If I own the place, they can't get rid of me. And maybe, just maybe, I make some changes around here. A little less beige. A little more dignity." Maxine grinned wide. "I always said you had a rebel in you. But I wasn't just doing it to prove a point. I was doing it because when they tossed me aside, they thought I was done. They never realized I'd been storing firewood all these years. And now, I was about to light the match. The next few weeks passed like molasses, slow, sticky, and strange. To the staff at Whispering Pines, I was just another sweet old lady with too many opinions and a penchant for lemon candies. But behind the scenes, I was laying bricks. Every phone call, every discreet email through the activity room's desktop computer, every lunch where I listened more than I spoke. It was all part of the foundation. I started with the basics. I revoked the power of attorney Matthew had tricked me into signing. Gina helped me file the paperwork so fast and clean, it made my head spin. Then, I transferred all liquid assets into a new trust, one only I controlled. And finally, I began discussions with a boutique investment firm in Austin about purchasing the property Whispering Pines sat on, quietly, of course, through a holding company. No one needed to know I was the one pulling the strings. Meanwhile, I played my role. I went to bingo nights. I crocheted badly. I nodded politely at the nurses who assumed I had dementia simply because I sometimes forgot where I left my shawl. But inside? Oh, inside. I was buzzing like a live wire. The only people who knew the truth were my girls, Ruth, Maxine, and Di. And let me tell you, keeping a secret among 3 sharp women in a nursing home was a feat in itself. Ruth kept trying to drop hints at dinner, calling me boss lady, and winking so hard it looked like she had a nervous twitch. "Will you stop that?" I hissed one night as she clanked her spoon, too loudly. "People will think you're having a stroke." She just grinned and whispered, "I'll stroke something if they try to boss you around again." Maxine was quieter about it, but every so often she'd pass me little notes, lawyer style, with suggestions for improvements once I took the throne, as she liked to say. The beauty of a place like Whispering Pines is that everyone underestimates you. The staff sees gray hair and walkers and assumes you've forgotten how to read a lease. The residents see a new face and assume you're still crying over your cat. But what they didn't see was the ledger in my mind. Years of balancing checkbooks in silence, knowing where every penny went, tracking numbers while George got all the credit. They thought I was weak. They didn't know I'd run the household on one income, paid off 2 mortgages, and invested in real estate while still clipping coupons and sewing Matthew's Halloween costumes from scratch. One Thursday, I asked to speak to the facility director, a smug little man named Ray with hair plugs and a voice like a dial tone. He met me in the garden room, where I pretended to be choosing marigolds. "I wanted to ask about some changes," I said sweetly. "The food's awfully bland, and the thermostat is kept low enough to freeze out pneumonia." He smiled the way someone smiles at a child asking for a unicorn. "We're doing our best with the budget, Mrs. Miller." "Of course," I said. "But out of curiosity, who owns the building?" His brow furrowed. "A private equity group out of Dallas." "Why?" "No reason," I said with a smile. "Just wondering who I'll be replacing." That night, I finalized the offer. Whispering Pines would change hands in 90 days. And Matthew? He still hadn't called. Not once. I knew what he was doing, sitting pretty in my house, probably thinking he'd gotten away with it. Maybe he'd even started going through my jewelry, wondering what he could pawn. He didn't know that everything of value was long gone, sold, moved, hidden. That the house, thanks to a document I signed back when George passed, wasn't even mine anymore. It was in the name of the trust. And soon, that trust would hold the deed to this entire building. Let him think he won. Let him think his mother had gone quietly into the good night. Because soon, he was going to get a letter. And when he opened it, he'd realize exactly who he had underestimated. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a gold embossed return address that read Magnolia Holdings, LLC. Not my name, not even my initials, just a whisper of me, tucked behind legal formalities and decades of quiet strategy. It landed in Matthew's mailbox on a Monday morning, right between his subscription to Architectural Digest and a coupon flyer for organic lawn treatments. Inside, it contained 3 things: a formal notification of Whispering Pines' new ownership, a cease and desist order revoking all property access to my former residence, and a personal letter, typed, signed by me, but cold as marble. He called that afternoon, not out of remorse, not even confusion, Out of rage, I was in the lounge room at Whispering Pines, sipping lemon tea while Ruth worked on a jigsaw puzzle of Paris. The phone rang in my lap, and I knew before I looked who it was. Mom, he snapped. What the hell is this? I took a long sip of tea, letting the citrus sit on my tongue. Language, Matthew. You bought the nursing home? Correction, I said. I purchased the facility and grounds under a management group I now control. Whispering Pines is one of several acquisitions this quarter. You'll be happy to know I'm diversifying. A pause. A heavy, stunned silence. Where did you get that kind of money? He asked, voice hollow. I laughed softly, a sound that made Ruth glance over and raise an eyebrow. Matthew, I said gently. Do you remember that summer you insisted I teach you how to play Monopoly? How you got mad every time I bought the railroads because you thought they were useless. You never understood value, sweetheart. Not real value. This is insane. No, what's insane, I snapped, is a grown man stealing his mother's rights out from under her while pretending it's for her own good. You don't get to gaslight me and then ask where I got the matches. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was a little smaller. Are you okay? I almost laughed. Almost. I'm flourishing. Then I hung up. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt resolved. Later that evening, I stood in the Whispering Pines common room and announced to the residents that the new ownership would be making some changes. First, everyone got cable in their rooms. Second, the food service would be upgraded. No more gray meatloaf and mush peas. We were bringing in a chef. A real one. From New Orleans. And third, and this got me a standing ovation, we were adding an on-site beauty parlor. With color. Highlights, trims, perms, the works. Di actually cried. Maxine started clapping like we'd won the war. Because we had. I wasn't just taking back my power. I was using it. Over the next 2 months, the place transformed. New paint, new staff, real coffee, not that weak stuff from packets. We added a greenhouse. A greenhouse. I named it George's Garden. And I planted tomatoes there. Heirloom. Just like the ones I used to grow. The staff didn't know what hit them. Half of them left. The ones who stayed adjusted or got trained properly. I made sure they understood that every person here had a name, a history, and a right to be seen. I wasn't just reclaiming my dignity. I was handing it out like candy to everyone who'd ever been forgotten. And I still hadn't heard from Matthew again. But I wasn't waiting. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting. It's thriving where they said you wouldn't. By the 3rd month of my ownership, Whispering Pines had begun to feel less like a waiting room for the forgotten and more like a little revolution disguised as a retirement community. The halls no longer echoed with silence. Now, they buzzed with laughter, arguments over crossword puzzles, even music from Di's ancient record player. The staff started calling me Miss Eleanor, and not in that condescending tone either, like they were saying boss, but with respect. And then, one bright Saturday morning, Matthew showed up. I was out in George's garden kneeling beside the basil when I saw a navy blue sedan pull up. The kind of car you lease when you're trying to look richer than you are. Matthew stepped out wearing sunglasses and a crisp white polo shirt, trying to look casual. But I could see the sweat at his temples. He walked through the main doors like he owned the place. He didn't. Ruth saw him first. He's here, she muttered, tilting her straw hat lower. The prodigal parasite. I snorted and stood up, brushing dirt from my gloves. Let's see what he wants. He found me in the main sitting room, talking to Maxine about the latest board meeting. Yes, we had board meetings now. I invited 2 residents, 1 nurse, and an outside consultant to weigh in on all big decisions. Transparency. Accountability. That's how I ran things. Matthew walked in like a politician who'd just been booed off stage. Mom, he said with a tight smile. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from me. Go on. This seat's still warm. He sat, glancing around like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The room had been painted a soft seafoam green. There were framed photos on the walls now, not just stock prints. We even had a small bookshelf curated by Di, mostly mystery novels and dog-eared romances. This place looks different, he said. I would hope so, I replied. It has new management. He swallowed, jaw twitching. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I raised an eyebrow. For which part? Signing away my rights? Packing up my life without a goodbye? Or the koi pond comment? His mouth opened, then closed. I thought I was doing the right thing. No, I said, voice calm cold. You thought you were doing the convenient thing. He looked down. I was overwhelmed. You'd been forgetting things. Where I put my keys, not my damn name. I snapped. Don't pretend this was about my safety. He sighed. What do you want me to say? That you finally understand what it feels like to be invisible, I said. To be used, repackaged, and stored like some seasonal decoration. That you know what it means to be discarded by the one person who should have remembered who you were. He looked like he wanted to cry, but I had no tears left for him. I miss you, Mom. I studied his face, the same one I used to kiss goodnight after bedtime stories and long days working doubles at the diner. I searched it for the boy I raised. I didn't find him. Maybe, I said, you should start by missing the woman who raised you, not the inheritance you thought you'd swindled. He flinched, and that's when I said the final thing. You're not in my will anymore. Dead silence. I donated half to the facility, the rest to a scholarship fund, for kids like you once were. Only these kids won't grow up thinking love is something to be manipulated. Matthew stood, lips tight. I guess I deserve that, he muttered. No, I replied. You deserve the life I gave you. And now, you'll have to live with how you treated it. He left. Ruth watched from the hallway. You gonna be okay? She asked. I nodded. I just finally buried something. What? My guilt. A month after Matthew's visit, things were running smoother than ever. Whispering Pines had turned into a well-oiled machine, but one that hummed like an old soul song, not just functional, but full of feeling. We had Friday movie nights now. Real ones, with popcorn and soft blankets and no one being scolded for laughing too loud. Maxine had taken it upon herself to start a weekly debate club, her topic choices always veering somewhere between scandalous and genius. Di organized a talent show, which involved her reciting poetry in a sequin shawl while Ruth did a dramatic reading of her grocery list. I cried laughing. And me. I ran the place in pearls and orthopedic shoes. But the most surprising thing that happened next wasn't the praise or the news coverage we ended up getting from a local paper. They called it the retirement home reborn. It was what started on the porch just after sunset one quiet Tuesday. A group of women gathered with me every evening now. We called ourselves the Widows Club, though half of us had been abandoned, not bereaved. There was Loretta, whose son put her in here after telling her the family was going on a trip. There was Alma, whose daughter simply stopped calling. And of course Ruth, who'd raised 3 boys and didn't hear from any of them unless they wanted to know where she stored the good china. That night, the conversation turned serious. Loretta, who rarely spoke of the past, said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Do you think they ever feel guilty?" I looked out at the horizon, the pink and orange streaks of dusk painting the sky like a watercolor. "No," I said. "I think they feel justified." There was a heavy silence after that, and then Ruth let out a long sigh. "I used to dream of being rescued," she said. "Like in the movies. A knock at the door. An apology. A suitcase of regret." Maxine shook her head. "I used to dream of yelling. Of saying everything I wanted to say. But in real life, there's no monologue. Just a slow fade." "And you, Eleanor?" Alma asked. "What do you dream of now?" I turned to them and smiled. Of leaving something behind that isn't just hurt. That night, I wrote the bylaws for the Eleanor Grace Foundation, a nonprofit housed within Whispering Pines, built to provide microgrants and emergency funds for seniors who'd been displaced, discarded, or financially manipulated by their families. I funded it with a portion of my remaining assets and set up a trust to continue it after I was gone. The next day, I got a letter from a woman in Tampa. She'd read about us in the paper. Her mother had been kicked out of her home by a greedy son and had nowhere to go. She asked if we had room. I called her myself. By the end of the week, her mother was living down the hall from me. We gave her the room with the best light. We painted it lavender. And when she walked in, her hands trembling, her eyes wet, I took her hand and said, "You're not invisible here." And she wept like she'd been seen for the first time in years. That's what this was about now. Not Matthew. Not even revenge. Legacy. Not in marble plaques or stock portfolios, but in healing. In helping the ones who gave everything and got nothing. I wasn't just rewriting my story. I was helping other women take the pen back, too. It was Di's idea, of course, a celebration dinner to honor the residents who had helped transform Whispering Pines. She called it our Not Dead Yet Gala. Ruth voted for dinner with the dames. I preferred something a little more dignified, but they outvoted me as usual. So we threw a party. We rented white linen tablecloths, brought in a jazz trio from the local college, and served shrimp cocktail in real glass dishes. Not a single styrofoam plate in sight. I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't put on since George's retirement dinner, and Di insisted on dusting my cheeks with blush. "It's your night," she said. "You'd better look like you own the place." "Di," I said dryly, "I do." We even printed out menus. Roast chicken with rosemary, green beans almondine, chocolate mousse for dessert. The staff, now fully trained and surprisingly enthusiastic, served with pride. And every seat at every table was full. Midway through the evening, I stood to make a toast. My knees protested, but my voice didn't. "I used to think the most painful thing in life was being forgotten," I said, looking out over a sea of silver hair and candlelight. "But I've learned that the real tragedy is forgetting who you are." The room quieted. I was a wife, a mother, a secretary, a widow, and for a while, just a name on a label at the end of a hallway. But now I am something else. I am a woman who remembered her worth. Di clinked her glass loudly. Ruth shouted to Eleanor. Everyone raised their glasses. And then, as I sat back down, I saw him, Matthew, standing just outside the dining room, in the shadow of the hallway. He wasn't dressed up. He hadn't even shaved. He looked like a boy again, lost and uncertain. But he didn't come in, just stood there, watching me from the edge of a world he no longer belonged to. He looked like he might cry, and I didn't move, because this was not his moment. It was mine. Later that night, after the last of the desserts had been cleared and Ruth had dared to flirt with the saxophone player, I walked outside to breathe in the warm evening air. The stars blinked above the pine trees, and the smell of honeysuckle drifted from the garden. That's where I found Matthew, sitting on a bench, shoulders slumped. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said. "You already did," I replied. He winced. I didn't know you had this in you." "That's the problem, Matthew. You never wanted to know." He was silent for a long time. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said, "and to ask if there's anything left to fix." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't a villain, just a boy who'd grown into a man without learning how to honor the woman who raised him. "You can't fix what you refuse to acknowledge," I said softly. "But you can begin, if you're willing to start as a stranger. Not as a son with expectations, but as someone who wants to earn a place in my life again." He nodded, slowly, like someone who wasn't used to being told no. "I'd like that," he said. I turned to go, then paused. "There's a volunteer list in the front lobby. We could use someone to push wheelchairs to the garden after dinner. You might start there." And then I left him, because forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a job. And if he wanted mine, he'd have to show up and work for it. By the following Tuesday, Matthew had signed up to volunteer. He showed up in khakis and a windbreaker, with a forced smile and a tray of pastries from the fancy bakery downtown, the kind of place that puts edible flowers on everything and charges $7 for a croissant. He looked nervous, which pleased me more than I'll admit. I didn't greet him. I let Ruth handle it. "Oh, look," she said, raising an eyebrow. "It's the prodigal weasel." "Be nice," I whispered, hiding a smirk. He took his first shift quietly, helping Mrs. Levington to the garden for her daily sunbath and pushing Mr. Arnold around the perimeter walk, listening patiently to a looping story about the war. I watched from a distance, arms crossed. He was trying. I'll give him that. The residents didn't know who he was, of course. Not at first. But Di figured it out fast. That woman has a sixth sense for family drama. By week 2, she was casually calling him Junior and giving him side eyes whenever he passed her table. Still, he kept showing up, and something began to shift. I caught him one afternoon kneeling beside Mrs. Rutledge's chair, holding her hand while she cried. Her dog had passed away the week before, and he just sat with her. No rushing, no awkward jokes, just presence. That's when I started to feel the first crack in the armor I'd built around my heart. I don't forgive easily. Not anymore. Life taught me that people treat forgiveness like a reset button. Press it and forget the damage. But this wasn't that. This was something else. One afternoon, while I was pruning dead leaves from the tomato vines in George's garden, Matthew approached with a folding chair and a tentative expression. "I know you don't want apologies," he said, "so I won't give one. But I want to tell you something." I nodded, still working. "When I was in college," he began, "I told people you worked in administration. I was ashamed of saying my mom cleaned houses. I didn't respond, just kept clipping. And now," he continued, "I realize you were the hardest working, most selfless person I've ever known. You didn't just raise me. You protected me from everything. And I repaid you by treating you like a task to manage. That got my attention." I looked at him then. His face was open, raw. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "you deserved a son who lifted you up, not one who buried you in papers and drove away like it was nothing." I straightened slowly. "You didn't bury me, Matthew," I said. "You gave me the shovel." He blinked. "And I used it," I continued, "to dig out the roots you forgot I had. You didn't kill me. You just helped me remember how deep I go." He laughed, then cried a little, and I let him. That day, I let him push my chair to the library. We didn't speak much, just sat by the window and watched the pine trees sway in the wind. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a woman abandoned. I felt like a woman rediscovered. Autumn settled over whispering pines like a shawl, soft and slow. The trees that lined the back fence turned shades of copper and fire. In George's garden, the tomato vines gave way to hardy greens and late-blooming marigolds. And inside, things felt steady, even peaceful. Matthew had become a fixture, not just to me, but to the community. He organized bingo prizes, fixed the broken handrail on the West Wing porch, and even sat in on the advisory committee once a month. And more than once, I caught him just listening, really listening, to the residents. That was new, but I didn't let my guard down completely. One change in behavior doesn't erase a pattern. It takes time, and time was something I'd learned to use wisely. Like money, like trust. Still, something had shifted. He stopped calling me mom like a formality and started saying it softly again, like he used to when he was little, tired, and safe in my arms. Then one morning, he knocked on the door of my suite, room 117, bright, cozy, with a window that caught the sunrise just right. He held a small box in his hand. "I found this in the attic," he said. "I think it's yours." I opened it slowly. Inside was my locket, gold-plated, a little dented. Inside, a photo of baby Matthew on one side, George on the other. I hadn't seen it in years. I thought it was gone. One of the things lost when he packed up my life without asking. My fingers trembled as I held it. "I didn't mean to take everything," he said. I didn't realize how much I was erasing. I nodded, not quite forgiving, but acknowledging. "Thank you for bringing it back." He hesitated at the door. "I was thinking the house. Yours, I mean. Would you ever want to go back? Just to visit?" I paused, then smiled. "Let's go this Sunday. I think it's time." He drove slower than I remembered, carefully, like the road could crack beneath us. We pulled up the long drive I once shoveled by hand every winter, and I saw it. The yellow shutters, the white mailbox I painted with sunflowers, the garden bed along the walkway, now wild with weeds. My house. We walked through it together, and each step was a time capsule. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and lemon oil. The couch was new, but the rug was the one I'd picked out after George passed. My favorite rocking chair sat in the garage, dusty but intact. I ran my hand over the banister, feeling the nicks from years of life and arguments and Christmases. "I'm sorry I took it from you," Matthew said, standing in the kitchen. "You didn't take it," I replied. "I let it go. But it wasn't for you to keep." He swallowed hard. "So what do you want to do with it?" I looked around, and for the first time, I didn't feel a tug of sadness. "I think we turn it into a transitional home for seniors who get kicked out or left behind." A soft place to land, just until they can breathe again. He blinked. Really? Really, I said. We'll call it the Grace House. His face crumpled a little at that. After you? No, I said, touching the locket at my neck. After every woman who gave more than she got and still found the strength to rise. The Grace House opened 6 months later. We painted the shutters a soft robin's egg blue, planted lavender and rosemary along the walkway. The front room, where I once fell asleep folding Matthew's baby clothes, became a cozy parlor with armchairs, shelves of books, and a coffee machine that always worked. Our first resident, Margaret, arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Her daughter had given her a bus ticket and a pat on the back after Christmas. No goodbye, just a phone call that said, "It's time to figure out the next chapter, Mom." We gave her a room upstairs, freshly painted butter yellow. I left a hand-knit throw blanket on the bed and a small vase of daisies on the dresser. She cried for 20 minutes. Then she unpacked. Then she asked if we had bingo nights. We did. The Grace House grew slowly but surely. We partnered with local clinics for health checkups, worked with a church group for transportation help, and started a donation closet of winter coats and walking shoes. And every month we hosted Sunday supper. That's what we called it. Long tables under hanging lights in the backyard, potluck dishes, folding chairs, laughter that rang deep and real. Sometimes Matthew came early and stayed late, helping set up the tables and then hauling trash bags after everyone went home. Once, I found him helping Mrs. Harper change her hearing aid batteries. He didn't know I was watching. I never told him, because some things are better earned quietly. One Sunday, as we sat on the back porch, watching the stars blink awake, he turned to me. "You ever think about what you'd do differently?" he asked. I considered that. "No," I said, "but I think about what I wish I'd known sooner." "Like what?" "That love without respect is just an obligation," I said. "That silence isn't kindness, it's surrender. And that sometimes the people we raise forget who we are because we taught them to believe we'd always be there, no matter how they treated us." He looked down, hands clasped. "I never meant to forget." "I know," I said, "but now you remember. That's what counts." He nodded, and then he said something I never expected. "Mom, you've built something incredible, and I don't want to just admire it. I want to help carry it forward. If you'll let me." I looked at him, really looked, and for once, I didn't see my failure as a mother or the boy who left me behind. I saw a man who was finally trying. "You start by washing the dishes," I said, smirking. He laughed, and did. Now, every time I walk through the halls of Whispering Pines or the rooms of the Grace House, I hear stories echoing, not just mine, but Ruth's, Di's, Maxine's, Margaret's. The ones who were tossed aside and rose anyway. Because we are not relics. We are not burdens. We are roots, and we are fire. And in the quiet aftermath of betrayal, we bloomed. Together.